And yet so many people settle for just being less than human. They settle for being a biological organism. And that's pretty much what you have to settle for in life if you're constantly focused on just trying to survive. Make horrible decisions in life. Yeah, you're living paycheck to paycheck. You've got baby mamas and baby daddies all over the place because you aren't going into something deeper. You focus so much on that physical and you didn't even pay attention to the psychological or the emotional. Oh, but things happen. That sounds like something an animal would say. Things happen when you don't think about them, when you don't plan them out, when you don't conceptualize yourself in the future. If you're only living in the very, very immediate present, like animals do. Cats do, dogs do that. And if that's where you're living, then you're living just like an animal. You're not becoming what you could become. You're not becoming what your nature actually demands that you become. And what that means is that you hate yourself. Because if you loved yourself, then you would do what your nature demands. Not Play-Doh, Plato. I was surprised. He was like, yeah. I'm like, really? You've heard of him? Neat. Plato. Plato is a very famous philosopher. He's a great philosopher. If I have any of you guys as seniors, we study him in the second semester, one of his things. And he had a very famous teacher. His very famous teacher was a guy named Socrates. And then Plato had a very famous student named Aristotle. And these are all names that we should know, actually, because they kind of form the whole foundation of Western civilization, Western culture, what the scientific method. All of it comes from these guys. Aristotle is probably the most prominent scientist to ever live in terms of what he created. It's quite amazing. These guys are the ones who came up with the ideas of atoms, which they had no microscopes, they had no ability to see these things, and yet they came up with the ideas of them because they were able to observe nature and say, well, based off of what we can observe from nature, they were able to deduce this idea that all of us are made up of these really tiny things called atoms. Just using pure reason, that was it. And it's a pretty phenomenal thing to be able to do. The whole idea of democracy comes from these guys, the ancient Greeks. You guys ever see the movie The Matrix? The whole idea of red pill, blue pill, that comes from these guys here. There's another guy I'll mention just a second, Diogenes. But Plato was the founder of the first academy in the Western world. And there's a sign that hung there which said, know thyself. He believed that the whole purpose of education was to know yourself. Because once you know yourself, you know how you fit into nature around you, how you fit into the world around you. If you're somebody who feels particularly alienated, like you don't belong, or you feel awkward in the world, there's a really good reason why. Because you probably don't know yourself. And these guys actually came up with some pretty interesting systems for how it is that you can know yourself. And in short, they're going to say, your very nature is this thing that you're talking about, soul and spirit. And they deduce this. They don't, even though you can't see it, but just like atoms, they believe that you could find these things and see them. Anyway, so Plato was trying to develop an idea. You guys ever see a sign like that before? Know thyself? You all walk past it at least 3 times a week. I promise you that. In any event, Plato was trying to come up with a definition for what it is for something to be human. And he came up with the idea, a human is a featherless biped. In other words, it's a thing that walks on 2 legs and has no feathers. Simple. There's another philosopher named Diogenes who did not like Plato. And Diogenes went and got a chicken and he tore its feathers out and then he carried it around Athens and he'd walk behind Plato and tell everybody, behold, Plato's man. Because we've been trying for thousands of years to try to identify or to define exactly what it is to be human. And there are ways of doing it, by the way, especially today. I won't tell you what they are, which we're thinking about. But why does that kind of thing matter? It becomes difficult because we say, oh, come on, you know what we mean. I don't know what you mean. I guess if I knew what you meant, abortion wouldn't be such a hot topic, would it? Because that's pretty much the only question when we're talking about abortion. What is it? Is a fetus a human being or is it not? Well, first you have to know what it is to be a human being. Because if it's not a human being, then you don't really need a reason to kill it. You could eat it for lunch for all anybody should care. If you walked in here and were like, I was at my desk working on something, and you go, hey, Scaling, can I kill this? I probably should ask you, what is this? I should look and see what it is. If you're holding like a cockroach, I might say, oh yeah, kill that thing. If you're holding your little brother, I'd probably say, no, don't kill that thing. Whatever the this is what matters. And so if a fetus is a human being, then there's no justification that's good enough for killing it. Any excuse that we use to kill it is not good enough. Well, what if the mom can't afford it? Well, what if your mom can't afford you? Should we be able to kill you when you're 13 years old? If you're a human being, then you're a human being. And if you're not, then you're not. And so if it's true that fetuses are not human beings, well, then that means that we should probably encourage more abortion, because there are lots of people who are alive today who really never should have been born. And the society would probably be much better. I mean, prisons are full of people who never should have been born. But if the fetus is a human being, then I don't know why we're so pissed off at Hitler. We kill more babies a year than Hitler killed in his whole campaign. And that's why these things start to matter. Because then when your friends, people come to you and they ask you these questions, should I have an abortion, should I not? It comes down to this question of, is it a human being or is it not? What is it? If we can't define what a human is, then we're stuck on that question. And just pleading ignorance and saying, I didn't know, I don't know. That's the same as the people who were living near the concentration camps in Germany when they were saying, oh, we didn't know what was going on. We don't accept it from them. We sure, it's strange that we would accept it from ourselves. So I guess I'll try again. What's a human being? What's a human? There is a pretty easy way to figure it out, by the way. Something that the Greeks didn't have that we have access to today. It's related to chemistry. Was that? Corpse? No, they're dead.
Cells?
You're getting closer now. Keep going down.
DNA.
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, DNA.
Oh,
It stores information.
Oh. Yeah. If I find a chunk of meat on the ground, I pick it up and I do a DNA test on it, it'll tell me where that meat came from.
I was thinking of it, but I was like, maybe it's a stupid answer.
No, as I think it's so obvious that there aren't. Yeah. So maybe the DNA can tell us at least what this organism is to be a human. So now that tells us what it is to be a human physically. But now, when Vicente's talking more about like the psychological and the emotional aspects of it, and then that becomes, what it is to be human. And there are certain things that are characteristics of human. So, for example, like Coco the gorilla had to be taught to write things. Gorillas have been around for a very long time. They've never developed the ability to do that. Same with language. They've never been taught the ability to express themselves. That's why when we have a signing gorilla, it's a pretty phenomenal thing. Literally a phenomenal thing. So now we ask this question about what it is to be human. Sure, it's to have DNA, but there also seems to be something else that's unique to humans as well, which is this ability to conceptualize ourselves, past, present, future, the ability to conceptualize ourselves abstractly in a world. And it doesn't seem like any other creature is able to do that. In other words, part of it is, it keeps coming up in my classes recently, that you're able to conceive of the fact that you were born. You can think back to it. You were there, but you don't remember it, but you can conceive of yourself as having been born. And then you can also now conceive of yourself as dying someday, because that means that you have access to this thing called teleology, things that have a beginning, a middle point, and an end point. And you can conceptualize yourself in those points. And more importantly, by the way, you can conceptualize yourself. You can conceptualize a world in existence before you were born, and you can conceptualize a world and an existence that will be in place after you die. And we're the only creatures that can do that. So that means that, and then by the way, that's really meaningful. We tend to hear these kinds of things and we're like, yeah, obvious. No, it's not obvious. It's not obvious at all. And I don't know, I seem to find the people who say that kind of stuff, like it's obvious, are usually the ones who think about it the least. What we mean by that is that there were people who came before us who thought very deeply about these things, and they were the ones who gave us access to these ideas. And then they come along after a whole lifetime of study, which was based on the whole lifetimes of studies of people who came before them, And then suddenly we can say, oh, it's common knowledge, it's common, common sense, but it really is not. This idea that we can conceptualize ourselves in a timeline and a world before us and the world after us, there's no other creature that can do that. And the interesting thing is that it doesn't seem to be connected to this idea of a brain. It's like to be conscious. Like, why are we conscious? It makes no sense. We have no idea why it is that we're conscious. The fact that you can sit there and do whatever it is that you're doing and think about whatever it is that you're thinking about is, we have no idea why we're able to do that. It just doesn't make any sense to us. Now, we might say, like, it's in the brain. No, trust me, scientists for thousands of years now have been trying to figure out what this consciousness thing is. And it's so obvious to us, and yet we can't explain it. We have no idea where it comes from. What we do seem to know is that it doesn't come from the brain. The brain's a physical organism. It's an organ. How does something physical produce something metaphysical, something non-physical? We have no examples of that in nature. All we can do is conceptualize and say, well, the brain does seem to control the body, so therefore consciousness probably comes from that. Our consciousness could come from our toes for all we know. We have no idea. Or it could come from something absolutely not physical at all, which seems to be the most likely case. Because we have no examples in nature of something physical producing something not physical. Everything that we can examine in nature, by the very fact that we can examine it, is because it's physical. We can taste, touch, smell, hear things. Use our five senses. And yet the soul and the spirit, the mind, the self-awareness, consciousness, none of these things are physical. And yet they exist. They're just as much a part of the world as the trees, as the floor that we're walking on. So now, it suggests, therefore, that to be human is also, therefore, not just this physical thing. It's something psychological. It's also something emotional. We have a depth of emotions in ourselves that no other animal has. We have a depth of psychology that no other animal has. And so what it is to be human is to be all of these things. It's to be emotional, absolutely. It's to be physical, and it seems like it's wrapped up in this package of the psychological. In other words, as we talked about, that psychological thing seems to be who you are. Seems to be who you are. If I were to ask you, who are you? You could say, I'm a human. That might be a good start, and that tells me about your DNA. But that doesn't tell me anything about you as an individual. It only tells me about your DNA. So to be fully human means to be all of these things, to be developed in all of these ways. And so it's not just the pain, although pain does play into it. There are different types of pain, but it takes growing into it. What I mean by that is, well, no need to be nice about it. I'll just be honest about it. Most people that you meet are not fully human. We have this capacity to use a mind, to develop ourselves, to become better, and yet most people are organisms. They go around, and what's the extent of their thinking of life? Eat, sleep, go to work, get money, eat, sleep, party. There's no access at all to the deeper thoughts of life, the parts of life that separate us from animals. Animals eat, animals sleep, animals go out and hunt, they go to work. And so those are all of the things that we physically have in common. So those aren't the things that separate us. All animals have those things in common. The very things that separate us from animals are those emotional, psychological things. And so you can't really become an actual human being. Otherwise, you're just an animal. And that's what a lot of people are. Their whole existence, their whole focus of life is geared on this physical thing. And yet that doesn't make you a human. I mean, I guess your DNA does in a very strict sense, but I mean, obviously there are better and worse. There are deeper thinkers and shallower thinkers, and you're going to notice that one of the things that animals never do is go to space, and yet humans do, because the thinkers are the ones who send us there. The thinkers are the ones who create art. Animals don't create art in nature. We can bring them into a lab, give them a paintbrush, and then give them some paints, and then when they create something, you say, look, it's art. It's not really art. It's not thought out. It's not conceptualized. It's not abstract. And yet so many people settle for just being less than human. They settle for being a biological organism. And that's pretty much what you have to settle for in life if you're constantly focused on just trying to survive. Make horrible decisions in life. Yeah, you're living paycheck to paycheck. You've got baby mamas and baby daddies all over the place because you aren't going into something deeper. You focus so much on that physical and you didn't even pay attention to the psychological or the emotional. Oh, but things happen. That sounds like something an animal would say. Things happen when you don't think about them, when you don't plan them out, when you don't conceptualize yourself in the future. If you're only living in the very, very immediate present, like animals do. Cats do, dogs do that. And if that's where you're living, then you're living just like an animal. You're not becoming what you could become. You're not becoming what your nature actually demands that you become. And what that means is that you hate yourself. Because if you loved yourself, then you would do what your nature demands. And yet so many people simply do not. And they settle for just being an animal. And of course, the problem becomes when those animals then want to tell everybody else how to live and give advice and stuff like that. It's problematic. And so you're going to find that so many of the worst aspects of humans is tied up in the physical. The parts of us that allow us to transcend and become what we actually are, fully could be, are the psychological and the emotional aspects. Those are if you really get down to it, if you only focus on that physical thing, the whole idea of soul and spirit mean absolutely nothing to you. And if they mean absolutely nothing to you, neither does good and evil, neither does right and wrong, neither does, art, music, none of these things. Those things only mean something to us if we transcend the physical and become something else. But it requires pain. It's difficult because, if it didn't, everybody would do it. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Yeah.